Welcome to our class on poverty, economy, and capitalism under and after COVID-19. Discussion and debate about how work, the economy, and financial affairs will be organized after COVID-19 are ongoing and complex. My goal today is to provide you with theoretical and conceptual tools to interrogate three questions. 1. How does COVID-19 reveal and exacerbate economic inequality on both local and global scales? 2. What problems does COVID-19 expose about the economy and capitalism? And 3. How might capitalism and anti-capitalism be organized after COVID? In this lecture, I will focus on the first two objectives, and the rest of this module will continue to explore the last objective. In particular, I encourage you to pay attention to the following key concepts, which will help you to navigate the rest of the module. These include poverty trap, the feminization and racialization of poverty, political economy, capitalism, and world systems theory, which is also called capitalist world economy. First, let's put poverty into perspective. In your opinion, who would be counted as living as low income in Vancouver? How much money do you think one single adult living in Vancouver would need annually to avoid being classified as low income? Before you answer, brainstorm a quick list of expenses. What are some costs to consider in this list of expenses? You'll want to take into account housing, transportation, utilities, including electrical bills, cable and internet, phone, and so on, food, restaurants, clothing, healthcare, maybe some funds for entertainment, other unexpected expenses. So after accounting for these expenses, what do you think someone would really need annually in Vancouver to avoid being low income? Based on the 2020 Low Income Cutoff for Canada, or LICO, one single adult living in Vancouver would need an annual income above $25,000. The poor in Canada have an average income between $13,000 and $18,000 a year. This is 60% from their own earnings and 40% from government transfers. Canada's poverty rate typically moves between 9 and 12%. Based on Canada's official poverty line, a person or a family lives in poverty if it does not have enough income to purchase a specific basket of goods and services in its community. The poverty line changes depending on whether you are in a big city or a small town, for example. The line also varies based on size of family. In 2018, about 3.2 million Canadians, or 8.7% of the population, lived below Canada's official poverty line. This is a slight decrease from 9.5% in 2017. For children less than 18 years old, the 2018 poverty rate was 8.2%. This is about 566,000 children. This has been slowly reducing since 2012, when it was at 15%, or 1 million children. Poverty in Canada is not widely distributed, but highly concentrated among certain groups of people, specifically children, as we've seen, as well as women, persons with disabilities, and Aboriginal people. For example, women over 65 are twice as likely to live in poverty than men over 65. And this is tied to the wage gap compounding annually, as well as ability to save for retirement and average life expectancy. As you can see from this graph from Statistics Canada, based on their Canadian Income Survey, for a long time, women have been more likely than men to fall into low-income groups. There are several factors that contribute to the gap between men and women's average incomes. First, women are more likely than men to work in part-time precarious jobs, contract and casual jobs, which pay less than full-time and permanent jobs do. Second, women are more likely than men to reduce work hours or miss work due to domestic responsibilities, like taking care of children and elder family members. This is tied to Canada's lack of affordable childcare. Third, women are generally paid less than men, with a 20% wage gap on average, depending on how you measure this gap. Additionally, immigrant and Indigenous women are affected the most. Although the differences between women and men's low income rates have gradually decreased and actually meet each other in 2014, as shown in this chart, How might COVID-19 impact this gender gap? To answer this question, we need to think about the feminization and racialization of poverty. The feminization of poverty is the phenomenon and trend in which women, particularly women of color, experience disproportionately higher rates of poverty than men. Here we see the book Nickel and Dimed on Not Getting By in America, written by Barbara Ehrenreich. In Ehrenreich's study of low-paying service industry jobs in the US around the turn of the 21st century, she found that the income from jobs called pink-collar occupations, such as serving, house cleaning, and selling clothes, jobs mostly held by women with low access barriers, are not enough to pay for basic necessities. This book followed the experiences of workers in relatively low-paying, non-manual, semi-skilled positions, primarily held by women. Ehrenreich found that these jobs do not offer enough income to pay for basic necessities. Further, Ehrenreich exposes the extra costs associated with this low income, particularly in minimum wage positions. Lacking surplus funds for things like a security deposit for housing, a down payment for a car, and other expenses means that people in poverty have to pay more out of pocket for things like living in a motel or always paying for car repairs. In the end, it is more expensive to live in poverty. Ehrenreich herself conducted an ethnography where she tried to work in these jobs and see if she could make an income and survive for a period of months, and she had to end the study early. This study has been critiqued in terms of ethics for a wealthy, high-status, highly educated white woman to try to go undercover to experience these things. Some argue it's condescending, some argue that she couldn't really have the full experience. However, her findings are still useful for understanding what we will call the poverty trap, which we'll discuss in a moment. Ehrenreich found that her income did not give her enough money to put a down payment on an apartment, so she ended up renting at a motel, which in the end was more expensive as a nightly rate instead of paying for a whole month of an apartment at a time, but she couldn't access that lower rate. In her motel, she also didn't have a proper fridge, and she didn't have the time working multiple jobs to cook and store food, and so she ended up making purchases every day, and she didn't have the transportation means to get to a grocery store, so she ended up buying food around the corner at places like corner stores where the food is lower quality and more expensive items. These are examples of the poverty trap. If you consider the experience of someone with a higher income who can shop at Costco and buy everything in bulk for a whole month, they have a lot more control over their circumstances, and that gives them the potential to save even more money for next month, whereas Ehrenreich struggled to make it just by this month. A UN news report shows that the International Labour Organization predicted that COVID-19 has affected 26 million jobs. And the four key areas that have been hit most by early 2020 were from food and accommodation at 144 million workers, retail and wholesale, 482 million workers, business services and administration, 157 million workers, and manufacturing, 463 million. Note how these first three sectors are what we call feminized sectors, where women consist of a greater portion of the workforce. In Canada, among the more than 1 million jobs lost in March, quote, female-dominated service sector jobs were among the first to disappear, unquote. Domestic workers such as nannies, housekeepers, and other home care providers, most of whom are women, particularly women of color and immigrants, are also highly vulnerable during the pandemic. This is different than the Great Recession, which was characterized as a man-cession, where men faced higher unemployment rates because they were more likely than women to work in industries such as construction and manufacturing. COVID, though, has been labeled by the Women's Institute for Policy Research as a she-cession instead of a recession. For women who saved their jobs during the pandemic, they are also more likely to work in feminized sectors such as health and retail, which put them at higher risk of exposure to the coronavirus. Let's look at this short video.